All right.
Y'all, thank you for joining us. My name is Deborah Soswer. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at Arrowmont School of Arts and Crafts. Welcome to the Instructor Roundtable series. This series started in July of 2020, and it highlights the talented artists who teach at Arrowmont. It introduces new ideas in contemporary craft, and it strengthens the connections within our community. Today is the day after Earth Day, and that is not a coincidence. Our topic today is renewal. I'm very honored, especially honored, to introduce our guest moderator and our three talented and respected artists, instructors who are here today. All of their work addresses environment and ecological justice. Our panel today includes Bryant Holsenbeck, who is a sculptor, weaver, environmental artist based in Durham, North Carolina. Zeke Leonard, who is a furniture maker, a musician, and educator in Syracuse, New York. And Emmy Lingscheit, printmaker and educator living in Urbana, Illinois. Just a little bit of quick housekeeping. I want to remind our guests that you are muted today during the chat, but we do encourage you to post any questions that you have throughout the discussion in the chat bar, which is on the right side of your screen. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can toward the end of the program. More information about the panelists are also going to be posted to the chat bar, and a recording of today's discussion is going to be posted across our social media, on our website, and our YouTube channel next week. Our panelists will introduce themselves a little bit more thoroughly in a moment, but first, please let me introduce our special guest moderator, Dr. Daniel Wildcat.
Yes.
Dr. Daniel R. Wildcat is a YouTube member of the Muskogee Nations of Oklahoma. He is director of Haskell Environmental Research Study Center and member of the Indigenous and American Indian Studies program at Haskell Indian Nations University, which is in Lawrence, Kansas. In 2013, he was the Gordon Russell Visiting Professor of Native American Studies at Dartmouth College, and he's taught at Haskell for 30 years. Is that right, Dan?
Well, 30, closer to 35 now.
35, almost 35 years. Dr. Wildcat is an accomplished scholar who writes on Indigenous knowledge, technology, environment, and education. He's been an invited speaker on American Indian worldviews at the Goddard Space Flight Center, National Museum of the American Indian, Harvard Medical School, Dartmouth College, and many other institutions of higher education. Dr. Wildcat frequently speaks to community groups and organizations on issues of cultural diversity, including Arrowmont. In 1992, Dr. Wildcat was honored with the Heart Peace Award by Kansas City organization The Future Is Now for his efforts to promote world peace and cultural diversity. He's author and editor of several books, most recently Red Alert, Saving the Planet with Indigenous Knowledge, where he suggests that current global climate change issues will require the exercise of indigenous ingenuity or indigenuity and wisdom if humankind will reduce the ecological damage that is underway. Dr. Wildcat, thank you for joining us for this program and as our moderator, and I will now turn it all over to you.
Yeah. Sanle, Gadasawa, Agelasan, Selagi, Zoyaha, Uchiha, Muskogee. Good morning, every afternoon, depending on where you are. I guess it's still for many of us, but just so honored to be moderating this one discussion. And we're really just going to try to have a discussion today. And what a great topic, you know, Earth and the relationship of, you know, the planet to some of the most creative people on the planet, artists, and how their work really resonates, you know, and explores those relationships. I do want to honor and recognize the sacred place where I'm sitting. I'm coming to you all from Lawrence, Kansas. I am less than a third of a mile from the south bank of the Kansas River, which takes its name from the original earth keepers of this place, the Kaw or the Kanza Indians of Kansas. This was their homeland. Of course, they were close, had a lot of interaction with the Osage to the east, and then all of those tribes that went up and down the Great Plains of North America following the bison herds. But it's a sacred place. I'm honored to be here. I want to recognize the land, the air, the water that surrounds me and gives me this breath of life. So yes, this is going to be a wonderful program. We're going to have one of, I think Kelly's going to be kind of moderating the chat box. We're not going to worry about it. She's going to send your questions to me as things pop up, and we'll try to work in your questions as we go through this wonderful discussion today about how we honor our Mother the Earth and the incredible role that artists and their work plays in helping us understand that fragile relationship we have with this beautiful blue-green planet. So with that, what I would like to do is we're going to ask each artist to kind of do a brief introduction, tell us about their work, and then we'll start our discussion. So going to start with Bryant Holsenbeck. And Bryant, take a few minutes and tell us about your work.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm happy to tell you that I do know that Durham, North Carolina was originally home to the Occaneechi and the Eno Indians. And the Eno River tells us that every day where I live. So anyway, I'm so happy to be here. I was just thoughts on this. These are animals that I make that I see around me. The alligator is after Cheeseburger, the alligator that used to live underneath the bridge on the way to near Pocosin Arts on the way to the coast. His name is Cheeseburger, and you can imagine why. Rabbits are what I see in my yard all the time. My job, I feel like, is to watch and see what's around. Nature's unfolding all the time. And it's amazing, and it's formation. And I also wrote down that the best thing I like about my work is that I can't do it alone. It's about what I see. It's also people collect for me and bring me stories. And the alligator's got a ridge of keys on its back and golf tees for his teeth. That's what people figured out I needed. Can I go to the next slide, see what else I'm going to talk about now?
You bet.
All right. So I began my life as a basket maker, as a hunter and gatherer. I learned what the indigenous people, i.e. the Cherokee, used. And then I kept thinking, wait a minute, there's all this plastic. If I'm currently indigenous, I have to need to use that. And then because there's too much plastic, I began doing large scale work about it. These are plastic bottles. This is how it works in community to make a waterfall like this. This first waterfall I ever made is pictured here. It was in Midland, Texas, where all the pump jacks are, and where we get in the Permian Basin. They cannot drink their water. And so they easily collected 10,000 bottles. It's about quantity. Plastic made to last forever, and you use it only once. There's another way to do this than have all these disposable, non-biodegradable things. And this is what I hope people start to figure out. And what's last on my images here, Dan? All right.
Let's see, here we go.
So when I work in schools a lot, and I talk about this, and I ask kids where plastic comes from, and they look at me like, are you crazy, lady? And the most common answer they tell me after they think about 2 seconds on it is, well, stores. Where do you think it comes from? They do not have the link. And often they do not really understand what petroleum is. So one day I decided, walking in the woods on the wait a minute, I have to do something about this. I want to live like people lived 100 years ago and see what I can do living without plastic. And so this book came from that blog of my attempt to live without single-use plastic. And it's ongoing, and it's hard work, but it makes me, in a way, it's like a prayer, because if I think about this, I don't have to yell about it or think, I just think, all right, just do what you can do each day. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Bryant. And so the next artist who's going to share about his work and what he does is Zeke Leonard. So Zeke, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll start by acknowledging with respect the Onondaga, the flame keepers of the Haudenosaunee, on whose ancestral land I am currently sitting. So I started out in theater, and I was trained as a set designer. And so for about 15 years, I was a set designer based out of New York City, and kind of had a moment where I realized that everything that I had ever made for 15 years was in a dumpster somewhere. There is no way. We just kind of outsource the storage of the things that we don't wish to have around us anymore, usually to people who don't have much of a voice in whether or not they get that outsourced to them. So I decided I needed to kind of change the way that I make and what I make and why I make. And so I went to school for furniture design, and have moved into making objects that have a longer lifespan, but then also trying to make objects out of things that have been discarded or are being discarded. So that led me to, and I think the next slide is furniture, but don't go there yet. We'll stay here. That led me to making instruments about 6 or 7 years ago out of trash, and finding things that people were throwing away and finding a way to give them a voice. And then that led to a particular kind of trash, which is pianos. People are throwing away pianos all over the country. Right now in Syracuse on Facebook Marketplace, there are 3 pianos that are free if you'll come pick them up, and you can do whatever you want with them. So I've started to make instruments out of them. This is an octave mandolin made out of a part of the piano called the rest plank. Rest as in wrestling. It's where all the tuning pins are, and that's what all of those little holes are. And so what I'm trying to do by making these instruments is I'm trying to make them so that they signify that they've come from somewhere, and that prompts a conversation. And then I get to start kind of evangelizing about waste and the waste stream. Now we can go to the next slide. This is just a couple of pieces of furniture. Again, all out of things that were discarded, a tree that blew down in the wind on the left, and then on the right, that's entirely made out of these beautiful red oak church pews that were being disposed of. A couple of them I actually got out of a dumpster, physically pulled out of a dumpster because no one else wanted them around. And then next is this other part of my practice, which is more about the built environment, because I came up as a set designer. I still like to think in terms of environments. And so on the left is a timber frame structure made entirely out of salvage from a building that was being gutted here in Syracuse. It's actually a musical instrument, but it's so big it takes 5 people to play. And so you have to have a community in order to play it. I like to make things, but I really like to make things that make the thing. And the thing that I really like to make is a community experience, and that coalesces around music quite often. On the right is a piece outside the Cincinnati Art Museum made out of Japanese honeysuckle that is an invasive species. It's the most invasive species in Ohio. And so we did a project where we harvested a lot of it, and then passersby could help us weave this structure that was actually a temple. And it was another way to create community, right? That we can work together, we can sing together. That's what brings us together. And that's also what lets us have conversations about what allows us as a community to move forward. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zeke. Wonderful, wonderful. Our last artist is Emmy Lingscheit. Emmy is going to talk about her work and what she does.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here too. Just to start out, I'm talking to you from Central Illinois, and these are the former lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Hoya, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. Here where I'm at. So I kind of, my work is interested in kind of in the interconnections between species, this kind of porous symbiosis between species that we, and kind of deep time, actually, these connections back to, the materials and organisms and peoples that lived here before that are kind of stamped out and homogenized into like this one kind of narrative of like capitalism and settler colonial ideology that we're just kind of born into and can't see. And so the flip side of that is I like to draw animals and always have too. And so I feel like Bryant said something about just kind of watching and seeing. So a lot of times I'm sort of just paying attention to my interactions with commerce and with the nature that's just around me, the sort of like synanthrope animals that happen to cohabitate well next to alongside human communities, and just the strange relationships and like hybridities that emerge. How in this piece, for example, I'm sort of trying to use kind of the visual metaphor of a freeway pileup to kind of lay open some of these kind of tensions that down the kind of veins and arteries of our civilization are running all of these like raw materials that have been extracted from nature and rendered into these commodities, and we're sort of like forcing the collaboration of pollinating bees into the agriculture that we rely on. And I'm sort of like, a lot of times I'm trying to, almost like a political cartoonist, kind of choose and create these kind of visual metaphors for things that I want to talk about that have a little bit of a visual hook, and then some more critical commentary kind of embedded in that, hopefully. Yeah, perfect. So with my interest in manufactured objects and sort of like human kind of technologies, I'm primarily a printmaker. So a lot of what I'll talk about is kind of print media related, but I had the opportunity to make a ceramic piece at a residency at the Kohler, and this was an exploration kind of continuing into examining the idea of species and how species change in relationship to proximity with humans. Like the population of the coyotes in Chicago, which is about 2 hours north of me. This piece was kind of looking at how our built environment actually changes their biology over time as they breed with each other and become these genetically distinct kind of like subspecies over time, and how strange and powerful and like kind of beautiful but upsetting that is at the same time. Last one. So this is kind of more of an example of some recent work where I'm using the power of the printmaking media to create multiples, and the interesting kind of parallels to nature with the kind of mutations and proliferation that can happen with printmaking, where you have, for this, these mushrooms and jellyfish were carved from one large matrix, and then I printed them a bunch of times, and it allowed these pieces to kind of sprawl and evolve in different sites when I cut and collaged and pasted up the different elements in a way that I felt like kind of mirrors and parallels sort of what's happening in the sort of like unbalanced natural world when biodiversity gets out of whack, and these kind of amorphisms between species that we're increasingly able to discover with better science, and also like returning to kind of different multiple ways of understanding that may not be like the dominant culture. That's a brief overview, but I'm excited to be in conversation with all these good people too.
Yes, this is exciting. Well, I tell you what, the themes that each of you touched on, it's just amazing. I see the people at Arrowmont who were thinking about this program were really paying attention to your work and what you deal with. So let's launch into a discussion, and then like I say, we have someone monitoring the chat and they'll send me questions as we go along. So please, the audience, feel free to submit, questions. We probably won't get to all of them, but we want this to truly be a conversation. So I think what I'd like to start with is, and this is just an open question, it's not for any one of you, but what strikes me as listening to you talk about your work is that your work is fueled by this kind of incredible attentiveness to the world around you and relationships, relationships you see. And so I'd like each of you to kind of dive into that in terms of what you're hoping maybe people will think about or ponder when they look at your work about, kind of their own situation in this beautiful thin biosphere of our Mother Earth, which we inhabit. So I just kind of throw that out. What would you like, your people looking at your work to kind of be connecting? What dots are you trying to get them to connect? Just an open question.
Well, I guess
Yeah. Go
for
it.
me, it's sort of about like perceiving this tension and interdependence between species that I think we're kind of encouraged to sort of overlook in the pace of life as things currently run. And just this recognizing that we have a responsibility, that kind of what happens, our small decisions, like we're sort of a little individually as humans, like a little blip in time. No one of our lives really amounts to that much, but collectively, like we're this large force that can kind of move the direction of the future and like the direction of ecology. And that's kind of humbling and sort of like can take a little stress off your shoulders to sort of like maybe act more responsibly in a way. It's like things both matter less and a lot more than we think at the same time.
Right. That's an interesting situation, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
In some way, I was going that same way in a different direction, but I've been noticing all the hawks in my neighborhood, which is full of lots of old oak trees. And why are the hawks here? I want people to notice the animals. The hawks are here because there's fewer and fewer places for them to hunt. So they come to where any trees are, and then find the songbirds and the squirrels. But I just want hope people take the time to notice. This year we've had a lot of rain, so my yard is full of actual wildflowers because I didn't cut anything. And it's some parts of the world are having too little, and because we've had too much, there's different flora in my yard this year. Just pay it. I don't know. I just think about that and wonder. Emmy, we are a little blip, aren't we? But while we're here, I think we need to just look at some of it's just beautiful. What I see, I love that hawk up there, and I know that hawk is going to eat something, live, because that's his job.
Right.
Well, and I love the idea that you've got wildflowers, which are probably a little more kind of native flora than this crazy monoculture ground covering that we obsess over in front of and in back of our houses, right? Emmy, you made me think of, and of course their name just fell right out of my head, but there was this 19th century preacher. I'll remember as soon as this ends, I'm going to remember their name. There's this 19th century preacher who was also kind of an environmentalist and problematic in a lot of ways, but said something that wrote something that's really stuck with me. That was the very worst thing that we can do is nothing at all, because we can only do very little. Right. And
right.
We're little and we're blips, but we choice make about how we move through our little blippiness. Right. And there's real value, I think, in doing whatever small things we can do, whatever that means. Right. I think the conversation I hope to push with my work is really about how we build value systems, and about the fact that we've built these value systems. We've built this single-use plastic value system, to Bryant's point, and we can unbuild those. Right. We can actively choice make in different ways, because we want to make it possible for more humans to live in the world. Right.
Oh, that's beautiful. Beautifully stated. This makes me think about one thing that resonates through all of three of your work and your practice, artistic practice, and that is that it strikes me that what you are doing is, all of your work is coming out of people's everyday lives. And whether it's discarded materials, whether it's plastic bottles, whether it's, Emmy's beautiful kind of reflection on literally the intersection in our highways and byways of this incredible commodity consumer culture that we're all sort of embedded in. And and it makes me think that really, there's a tremendous power, I think, that artists have in communicating something about our environmental crises, that I feel like sometimes scientists who do good work, but often aren't the best people to talk about their work because they tend to talk in very scientific, technical terms. What I like about all three of your work is you're engaging with people at this deep kind of everyday experiential, kind of level. And I'd kind of like to hear you guys talk a little bit about that, and whether you think, what role art can play in really calling people's attention to the world beyond the walls where they're often spend most of their lives. And I think all of you in your work do that. So that's just an open question. Anyone can respond to that.
I do think like the important role of art is to offer alternative stories that can be seeds for like even beginning to try to imagine alternatives to like the dominant thing that we've all kind of grown up and are blind to. Because it does feel like it's like inevitable in a way, and it's hard to picture even another direction to go in, or you feel so powerless. And I feel like particularly like Bryant and Zeke working with other people too in your work, this collaborative element too, but like brings people together in the same space to like kind of dig into it and to collectively start to like envision some other ways to do things.
We're all teachers, and in the teaching you're giving people permission to figure stuff out. Here's a way I figured this out, and if you did it this way, I mean, we always learn from our students.
Yeah,
right.
I think that figuring out maybe gives them some power to move in those small ways that Zeke talks about, perhaps. Looking at. I mean, every time I see your prints, Emmy, I just get pulled in further, and that makes me think of that. So you're giving people permission to open up. Zeke, I have a question for you that just started occurring to me yesterday, which I got to say because, okay, so what is indigenous, like the wildflowers?
Yeah.
Everybody's now fighting stilt grass, and you got all that red honeysuckle. I just did a project a couple of years ago using privet and with community and making a labyrinth. It's like all these different plants are coming together and arguing with each other. Who's going to live here? And it is one world. So in a way, they're struggling just like we are. I don't know. Does that make any sense? Yeah,
I think that's true. And plants do move, right? I mean, there's to go back to the science, there's documentation that southern trees, like in the American South, are migrating north as the climate changes.
Right.
And they're measurably moving north. And so plants can kind of move around, right? But when we come in and move them further and faster than they want to go, that's when the problems are. I mean, I grew up in North Carolina, and we don't even have to talk about kudzu.
Right.
But one of the woods that I use a lot is American chestnut. Here's a guitar neck that I'm working on right now. This is all chestnut that I salvaged out of a piano built in 1922, actually. And the reason that is significant is that it wasn't too many years prior to that a plant from Asia that was brought to the Botanic Gardens in the Bronx in New York City had a very little beetle that hitched a ride that loved chestnut trees and no known predator in America. And that was the end of the American chestnut. By World War II, the American chestnut, they'll grow, get to be about this big, and then they'll die. There are a couple of pockets of them. People here at the State University of New York School for Environmental Science and Forestry, which is right over here, are working on some kind of chestnut reintegration stuff. But we do, we're so focused on moving things around in ways that they don't want to be moved, and the results can be disastrous.
And all those plants are going to be there beyond us. Beyond us.
This really goes to the heart again of this kind of, all of your work is built on these relationships, and we're all bound up in just a complex set of relationships. And a question that's come up that I think is really a good one is what's your feeling about how in education, how can we get, beginning in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, what's your notion about, what role art can play or what teachers should do to kind of start getting children to understand this relational character of the world that we're in. And I think that's a real challenge today, particularly when we often hear about arts programs being eliminated in public schools. It's worrisome.
It is worrisome. Yeah. I've been, since the pandemic hit, I planted a garden last year for the first time ever. And I thought, for the first time in probably decades. And I thought, well, maybe that's a fluke, but I did it again. So maybe this is a new habit that I have. But it did make me think of like kindergarten and planting the bean seeds and like doing, experiments where you draw different food color dyes up a stalk of celery. And like those really do stick with you as these touchstones that I hope that people will continue to be able to have, because it also, some of what art does, I think, is back to that question of science, is like science has been so politicized in a bizarre way that people are sort of impervious to some of the things that we're talking about because it's become so affiliated with a particular political position that seems so arbitrary. And I feel like those early experiences can hopefully kind of diffuse that, later, that this is for everybody. It's accessible to everybody. You don't have to know everything about science right off the bat. You have a right to sort of like explore. And I think that's the thing for students is they may not feel empowered to talk about a topic or like they know enough to really go out and like speak on that topic, but to sort of like lower the bar so that there's entry for people.
Right.
It's important.
Yeah, I find that when I'm with very young people in a circle and I say, who here sings? Everybody's hand goes up and they say, what do you want to sing? We'll sing anything, right? And then I do the same thing with my college students and I say, who here sings? And like one person will be like, I kind of sing in church sometimes, and it gets removed from because we feel like we have to be either an expert at it or we have to be able to commodify it in order to say that we do it. But in terms of the very young people, I want to go back to one of the things that Bryant was saying, that in the studio so often we're solving problems, and that and as you're going, you're kind of trying to figure it out. And being a creative person is that, however we do it, whether it's with a woodcut or fibers or woodworking or anything else, singing, cooking. And I think that, to me, that's the real value of any creative practice, is that it forces you to be ingenious, right? In a way that, because what we do fundamentally is we change the world, right? When, Emmy, when you cut a line on a block, you've changed the world from the world where that block had no line cut in it to a world where it does, right? So fundamentally what we do is make change. That's what art making is. That's what being creative is. And once you can own that, then you start realizing all the things you can do with it.
You can discover stuff for yourself too, and you can question. Emmy, it's interesting you started with young kids and the bean, because that's immediately what I went to is the, watching life open up. And, if you live in an apartment complex or something, you may never have known that.
Right.
you know, but to watch it and to see the roots, and to learn from that. I've been watching the kids go in the backyard next door and visit the chickens. And I hear sometimes there's, you know, animals in classrooms too. But I want to say that we founded in Durham a thing called the Scrap Exchange, which is a creative reuse center, and it's been going on for 30 years. I was one of the founders, and so now there are all these kids they've always lived with the Scrap Exchange, where you can go into the store. Yeah. Let's put this together with this and that and that. I mean, it's huge to the community, and I gift it to everybody if you can figure something like that out. But what I want to say is, when they go into events, there is no glue. They give them maybe a stapler and some tape. That's all you have to put stuff together. But you know, it's mostly stick wrap and something. And you know, I don't know, glue's a dead end sometimes. I mean, it's not in, you know, your instruments, but it's like allowing kids and people to figure out how things might work. Gravity, you know? So anyway, I hope that schools do not get locked down into having to learn only certain things, because that's a problem.
Well, you know, your work, all of your work embodies, you know, really you're bringing so much together. You're bringing your life experience, you're bringing, you know, kind of the lived experience in different environments that you have been a part of, and all of those relationships, and then those kind of get conveyed in your work, you know, and then make people think about their own relationships and their own identity, who they are. And I'm kind of thinking, so here's kind of an interesting question, because I know several of you have talked about, you know, this kind of idea of community, you know, and how, you know, community, the issue of community today, if you will, even some people would argue the crisis of community or communities we are experiencing today, seems to me to be almost palpable. You know, we're so divided, so pulled apart in our work lives. You know, people are you know, often pulled apart by political ideologies. And I'm trying to formulate this as a question. Do you think through your work, there is a message about something we need to understand about the importance of community and how we might try to make communities healthy again and resilient? And I think a lot of people are struggling with that right now.
I know that people are so thirsty for it. If you give them the opportunity to work together, I mean, Zeke, you've had that experience, you know, with they run to it. And what I was thinking, it's non-denominational. You know, you know, it sort of happens at the farmers market, but in Emmy, I was thinking about you, and you know, I can just imagine standing there with other people watching, looking at those mushrooms turning into jellyfish, and the buzz that creates. You know, when you create something interesting that people can gather around and experience, we're starving for it. We're really starving for it.
That participation, I think, is really important. I mean, one of the reasons that I love to make musical instruments is that I have yet to find, in my experience, not that it doesn't exist, but in my experience, a space that as many people can feel connected to as being in a circle making music together. You know, every major faith tradition on the planet involves making music together in some way, or eating in some way, or both together, right? But so I have these musical communities up here and that I'm part of, and pre-COVID, we would all sit around and play a song together, you know, a Hank Williams song or something. And there would be people ideologically radically different from me, people generationally radically different from me, but we can all get together behind playing you know, whatever song it was. And for that 2 minutes, we all were doing the same thing because we wanted to do the same thing. And that is so moving. And I think part of the reason that we are, well, right now feeling a need for it is that we aren't, I mean, this is all we have with each other, right? But I think that even pre-COVID, you know, we come out of our house and get in our car and drive to work, and then we're at work and we get in our car and we drive back to our house.
Right.
And there's very little room there for us to interact unless we do it on purpose, right? And I think that purposeful community building, I've never regretted doing it. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's kind of hard and messy, and sometimes you gotta, you know, people tell you things that you really don't want to hear. But in the end, I've never regretted doing it.
Yeah. You know, that's interesting because, you know, what you've pointed out, and it's sort of like the example you gave of singing, you know, and this is why I don't want to overly dwell on this, but this is why I think early education is so critical, and we've got to make sure that art stays a part of this. Because it seems to me part of what children lose in the we have designed education is they lose the inhibition they have quite young to just put themselves out there and to share and to risk, you know, there's no self-consciousness about, oh, someone's going to look at me and I'm going to be stupid or this is that. And I feel like our education is rightfully should be condemned for we do education as if we're producing widgets. We're just going to put people on the production line and get them through, and they're all going to learn the same thing. And like at the end of the day, we wonder, well, how come people don't seem to be very creative?
You know, I think as artists, we're learning to trust our hearts and our curiosity. And we desperately need to allow children to trust their hearts, as well as knowing what 2 + 2 is. And, you know, and that's what some art can do. I just think it's to learn to be true to yourself and your own curiosity, and what different curiosities of other people come together and weave and make something beyond that.
Beautiful. No,
I mean, I do want to say that I have a lot of friends that are very good teachers in the public school system here, and so I think it's about value systems. I want to make sure that, I mean, they work hard and they do great things, and I want to honor that.
Yes.
But I think it really does come down to the value systems that we build, right? And we built these value systems that talk about a particular kind of activity as being successful. And, you know, there's someone in my life for whom that kind of activity is very, very hard. And so they're not successful at it. But that doesn't mean that they're not intelligent, and it doesn't mean that they're not creative. It doesn't mean that they can't do a lot of things. They just don't do that thing in that way very well.
Yeah, it's not about the testing. And, you know, if you're in a public school as a teacher, you're teaching from the heart, because you're not teaching for money.
Yeah,
You know,
that's for sure.
Because you love those children, and they know that. And for some kids, you know, if you're in a school with kids that are homeless, you know that the teachers are their stability and their heart.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I feel, thank you for recognizing public school teachers, because I mean, they're some of the gifts we have, and they probably have to fight all the time against teaching.
Oh, I think you guys have put that emphasis correctly. I mean, right where it needs to be. We've got great people, bless their hearts, who are in the public school systems and underpaid and under-recognized, sometimes disempowered by virtue of the system we're in. And so it seems to me that in some ways, each of you in your work, okay, so the buzzword today is systemic change. We need systemic change. You guys are all in your art sort of challenging people to think about systemic change. And so could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's really fascinating. And again, it's that notion that, you know, we shouldn't treat the mind and the heart as if they aren't interrelated. And in fact, it's that heart that may stir people to think differently about the world. And so I'm going to throw that out. Emmy, what are you thinking?
What's the question again?
The question is sort of, you know, what do to really capture that heart sense of that's important for systemic change. Everyone's talking about systemic change. So you go inside the Beltway, we got every think tank there. They're putting out they're getting out their flip charts, they're drawing pictures, they're working with numbers and algorithms, and it's all up here. That's the way they're thinking a system. I think people respond here to injustice, to inequality, to privilege. They respond here, and it seems to me that's what's missing, and that's why your art is so important, because it speaks here first, and here generates then the ideas here.
Yeah, I think after a point, all the data about climate crisis just becomes so anxious making, it sort of shuts people down, and you can start to feel like, well, nature's ruined. There's no, it's compromised, and what are we going to do now? And so I feel like one of the things that I'm interested in doing, and maybe we all are in different ways, is like embracing the strangeness of that, of things. Like it's altered and it's bad. Like Zeke, you talking about the chestnut trees, that's something that's like very sad, but also kind of fascinating to me. And like, there's something about acknowledging the despair of species that are gone. That's like it's like grieving and then moving forward to like, what can you do proactively to recognize that stuff can happen again and again. And it's true. I don't think that unless you can affect people emotionally, anything can happen. And we're also very insulated against, I think increasing empathy is the key too, because like the climate crisis stuff is affecting, you know, there's that metaphor of the train, and it's the people in really impoverished coastal countries that are going off the cliff of climate change first. And we're actually quite well insulated here in North America, and not uniformly, but that the more we can increase, like allow people to extend their empathy beyond their immediate friends and family to the people that are now being affected through like the storytelling of art and community. I don't 100% know how to do that efficiently, but we're finding our way through doing, I think.
I love that you bring empathy into the conversation.
Yeah. Because
we're all being fed. Everybody on this Zoom call is not worried about where their next meal is coming from. And yeah.
Well, and I think the empathy, the need for empathy, I mean, you're right that it's about, okay, who are the people that are here that we aren't seeing that are being affected, but it's also the train exists in time, right? And so I have 2 children. If they choose to have children, the world that they're going to come into is going to be, as you say, irreparably altered. And so, and you know, I mean, there's a line in a song that says, I've got strangers for great grandchildren and I got strangers for great grandparents, right? Like, I don't know, I won't know either of those people, but my great grandchildren, if that's how it goes, are gonna receive every single time I drove my car to work instead of riding my bike. Right, they're going to receive the outcome of that choice making, and so that empathy. I mean, there are people right now who, as you say, are in very serious situations, but that also goes forward in time in a way that I think we need to be mindful of.
Right.
Yeah, that makes me wonder if some of our work will make people be more active with social justice and help to make the policy changes that need to be changed.
I'm really
Mhm.
seeing it in the college students that I teach. I'm really hopeful about Generation Z. I think they have new tools and
Mhm.
they have a very different mindset than even students 15 years ago. I'm very hopeful about it.
I would
Yeah,
agree with
that,
Oh,
no, I think that's true. Absolutely true. Yeah, Emmy?
I was just agreeing with Zeke. I think this generation is more in touch with all of these things and has more kind of connectivity to try to organize and address it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and there's ways that social media does communicate. A tree fell down in a park near us, and then one day we found it. And so this is all through social media. It got covered with cardboard, all the parts, and then there began to be messages on it. And it's a beautiful community project. And now I know the guy, I should have known this guy that put the cardboard on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but he began a process that drew everybody in. Anyway, social media can be there for fun and joy and also change, you know.
Yeah, so I want to take this theme on social media and just kind of go with it a little bit, because I started, by, saying one of the things you all share is the role the environment literally plays in your work, how you're thinking about that, how your work is, an expression of different relationships you have found in the environment. Some of those very everyday, common, just consumer habits, or how we get our food, or where it comes from, or what we throw away. Now, I want to problematize this a little bit. How do you think art will change as these things increasingly become young people's environment? I want to be very honest about this. I was giving a presentation at a tribal college over a decade ago, and I was talking about the environment. And when I got done, the biology professor, I won't tell you which tribal college, but this is a tribal college in North America, he came up to me and he said, "Gee, I loved your presentation. Really got my students to thinking and talking. But I want to challenge you on one thing. You keep talking about the environment outside the walls of the building we're in. This is where my students spend all of their time, and this is what they're looking at." And it kind of made me kind of go like, "Oh my God, he's absolutely right." I mean, if and so this, we know, has good and bad consequences, right? I mean, I think most would say, could we have imagined January 6th in the nation's capital but for this kind of technology? So I want to problematize that for a second. You guys think very much about environment. What's your thought about how this kind of technology will influence art in the coming generations? Good, bad, indifferent? What?
Both.
I feel like there's an inevitable. I mean, I shouldn't say. I'm just trying to say things are not inevitable, but that I think we just have to make the most of that technology, and that one of the things that the types of art that we're doing with students has to offer is like interrupting the immediacy of that a little bit, and like things happen so quickly now. I'm very grateful that I didn't grow up with that technology at the time that my brain was forming, because I can tell how much it forms my brain now to have this next to me. Every time I touch it, my fingers go to specific apps that I'm like, I didn't want that. And I think it's the things you spend the most time with, those are your strongest neural connections. And so to offer students, or like young people, or even people of any age, something that builds different pathways, can only be good. Because I agree with you, it's not all rosy with that. And there's also like a lot of toxic, the algorithms like the things that spread
Oh,
the
yeah.
fastest, which are often the more toxic ideologies for things.
Right.
So
Mhm.
Something Zeke's, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Oh, I think that I was just going to say that like cultural literacy online is something important with students too. That I think hopefully we're working on with them too. Like what's good information and what's false.
Yeah.
Is something in online ecology that's really important. I'm done.
What Zeke said about the plants and we're pushing them further, putting them places they shouldn't be. It's like our brain is not catching up with how much information is coming in. A writer friend of mine was talking about, how many natural connections or friends people used to form in a lifetime. And it's like maybe 100 or 70 or something like that. And now we're dealing, how many friends do you have, on Facebook and stuff? We're dealing with a different animal altogether. Cultural literacy. What kind of literacy did you say that was, Emmy, about online?
Cultural online literacy. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, how do we handle it? How do we handle all of that coming in? I don't know.
Because the genie's not going back in the bottle, right? I mean, this is here to stay.
No.
But I would also say that this conversation right now is also because of it, right? I would never have gotten to meet you three and have this conversation. So there's value in it. I think one of the things that we're going to really run into is the energy that the energy resources that it takes to power these, and the servers and the satellites and all that. But also the e-waste situation is pretty stunning.
Right.
Yeah.
And so one of the challenges that I give to my students a lot is, sure, fine, right? If this is where you want to live, fine. How do I make this object have more than a 24-month lifespan, right? How do I take the cadmium, the heavy metals, the carcinogens that are locked in here and keep those from entering the waste stream for the longest possible amount of time?
Right.
And that I can't solve that, man.
Can you make an organic cell phone?
I mean, maybe, why not, right?
Really?
That seems cooler to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've got it here. This is a great way to bring it back around to a piece of art. So Emmy, piece, that shows the mushrooms and the jellyfish. If any of you have been reading about the recent studies on mycology, and this is new to me, but I've just really been fascinated with it. People who are studying the soil and fungi relationships are now saying these are communication systems. What we have between the fungi and the plants and the tree roots is this incredible web of communication. Yeah. And so there you go again. Maybe, I had a good wag here, Yupik elder who I got to work with for several years, and he always used to talk about this idea of biomimicry. Our best solutions can be found if we just pay attention to the world we are in and those natural relationships. And it's just great to see three artists who are thinking that way and kind of doing that in your work. But I think I think maybe that's part of what we can engender through your art, through releasing children's creativity. And why should they separate science and art? Some people would argue there's more art to scientific discoveries than there is analytic linear rationality. Things pop and someone goes, wow, I see this now.
I have a friend up here who's on the mathematics faculty, and he said to me one time that he sees mathematics as being a way to describe the beauty of the universe. And I just sat me down. What a great way to talk about it,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because it's all the same. This idea that you can be an artist or a scientist,
right?
Yeah.
That's a false dichotomy.
Exactly.
They're all trying to figure things out.
Right.
Both the scientists and the artists have got to get industry to be a little more creative, or a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Did you read about the kids that discovered from mushroom psyllium that they could make something that would replace styrofoam in packing?
Mm-hmm.
And so where's that happening? Who's doing it? I mean, it's brilliant. But I was talking to a recycling guy. He says, no, we can't do that. We've got this other system set up. It's like, wait a minute. People are working it out. Don't get in our way. Scientists.
Our school has an art minor. And so occasionally we'll get students from like chemical engineering who take some art classes and get an art minor. And I feel like that's really, it's like not a huge lucrative moneymaker, like from a capitalistic standpoint, but we're like putting seeds of like art out into the world. I feel like we need a whole other session to talk about mushrooms if we all want to get together again.
Yes, absolutely.
But like one of the things about looking into natural systems and networks, like the wood wide web, people have called that
yes.
And like I think I grew up with an idea of nature too as being like in savage competition, like all organisms are just competing and trying to eradicate each other, and that there's like a lot more cooperation and symbiosis happening, and also like weird gender bending in nature. Like we have these like binaries and dualities in just like human culture and different pockets of human culture, and that nature contradicts that quite often. I was reading something about fungi sometimes produce asexually and sometimes sexually, and they have a whole host of different genders that are compatible on a chromosomal level, and I think that's fascinating too.
Earthworms are really good to bring to the classroom.
Yeah.
They really get it on, and I don't one gender.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the bottom line here is something we could all agree on is maybe one of the things that every teacher could do and start thinking about how to creatively work this into their modules and what they have to prepare students to know when they have those tests at the end of the year is get them out of doors. Children just being out of doors immediately gets children engaged, and I think, boy, there's something we could have a whole great discussion about. How can we? No wonder we complain about students having attention deficit disorder. In my mind, it's pretty unnatural to expect a 7 or 8 year, 9-year-old kid to sit still for 6 hours a day at a desk inside. And we could be teaching science, we could be teaching art, we could be teaching everything out of doors for a large part of the year. That would be exciting.
And if we did that, they'd be able to experience beauty.
Yes. And so I want to thank you. We're coming to the end of this discussion, and I knew that this would happen because I kind of feel like we're just starting to hit on all of our cylinders, and now it's ending. But I want to share with you two thoughts. The first one is something that the people who don't have letters after their names, but the wisdom keepers of our traditional worldviews and knowledges have taught me. And it's that, here's what I think you guys are talking about. In part, the world, we all know the world is full of ugliness. And we've got to learn to face that ugliness, to confront that ugliness. But we can never let that happen at the expense of any human being losing the ability to see the beauty that surrounds us. And we are surrounded by beauty every day. And I've thought about that a lot, that we are surrounded by beauty every day. And when you think about the worst ugliness, unfortunately, it's been members of our species that have produced that. And so I really applaud you all for your work and what you're doing. And we'll share one quote. This comes from our Pulitzer Prize winning, still living, thank goodness, we still have N. Scott Momaday with us. And his most recent book is called Earthkeeper, Reflections on the American Land. He didn't pay me to hold the book up or anything, but just a marvelous, beautiful little piece. And here's what N. Scott Momaday says, and you guys have affirmed this for me, okay? All three of you. He says, a friend and colleague of mine wrote of the machine in the garden, and another wrote of the virgin land. He said, their writing centers on the coming of the industrial age to a pastoral America and the notion of manifest destiny, respectively. Both are important studies of American history, and as such, they focus upon the past. But it is the present and the possibilities of the future that must concern us. Ours is a damaged world. We humans have done the damage, and we must be held to account. We have suffered a poverty of the imagination, a loss of innocence. There was a time when, quote, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent, unquote, of this new world, quote, commensurate to his capacity to wonder, end quote. He said, I would strive with all my strength to give that sense of wonder to those who will come after me. I think I don't want people to stop and hold their breath. I think let's stop and take a deep breath, and let's try to instill that imagination and sense of wonder in the world around us. And you three have done that for me today. Thank you so much. It's great having this discussion, and I think we're going to start to wrap this up a little bit.
Indeed, we are. Well, gosh, I am filled with wonder right now. What a wonderful conversation and discussion that I've been a witness to. Really, truly inspiring. Thank you guys so much for your thoughtful dialogue. And also, I want to take a moment to acknowledge where I am sitting here, respectfully, that Arrowmont is on the ancestral lands of the Cherokee Nation here in East Tennessee. So thanks again, everyone, for your participation, especially to our artists, to Bryant and Zeke and Emmy. Really wonderful. Such a special thanks to you, Dan. You have been an amazing moderator for this discussion. It's just, as you said, we can, and as we suspected, we could keep going with many more hours of great conversation. And hopefully we will, back together, either remotely or in person. So for those of you who joined us at home today, thanks also for being part of this conversation. This recording will be released next week, so look for it across our social media and on our website. I also want to let everyone know it's filling up, but we do have a few more spaces available in 2021 national workshops. So as we're all kind of mounting our defense against this global pandemic, Arrowmont is very excited to welcome everyone physically back so we can continue these conversations across the table from each other. So on behalf of myself and everyone here at Arrowmont, thank you again. Please, everyone, be safe and stay creative. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Sanlai.